That kind of experience of bringing all those things into play, the imagination, the wonder, the heart, and the laughter, that was something that I wanted to bring to this film. It's set in the 80s, and so it felt like it was the perfect way to tip the hat to those classic Amblin-esque films, those great Steven Spielberg coming-of-age fantasies of the 80s, and to bring that aspect of filmmaking into this franchise, which has had a different aesthetic for years, to still honor that, but to bring something new to it, and that was what we tried to do with this film. Well, I think the thing that's always been interesting about Bumblebee as a character in the films is that he's clearly the Autobot. He's clearly the Transformer that has the most affinity for humanity. He's the one who has the deepest connection with humans. And I think that's fascinating. Why is that? What is it about us that he finds interesting? What is it about him that forges such a deep connection with us? And so one of the things that we're able to do in this movie is to explore how that happened, how he was able to do that. What is it about him that is able to connect with us so deeply, and what's unique about him? Being able to take the time in a film where it's not filled with dozens and dozens of awesome robots, but it's just this one character that we're able to focus in on and figure out, what does he think? How does he feel? What makes him tick? I love exploring characters, and that's what we do in this film. We really get to understand who Bumblebee is and why people should and do love him. The thought was maybe to go in a different direction on a Bumblebee solo film. And as I was discussing it with Lorenzo de Bonaventura, the producer, he had mentioned Amblin as something of a touchstone. And for me, that was ringing all the right bells. I was a child of the 80s. I grew up loving those classic Spielbergian coming-of-age tales, all things Amblin. That essentially defined my childhood. And, in fact, the first film that I remember that really moved me to tears was E.T. I saw it in the movie theater when I was around 8 years old with my mom, and by the end of it, I was just absolutely weeping, sobbing in my mom's arms. And to be able to tell that kind of a story, to be able to take this big, expansive franchise, this huge canvas that Michael and the team have built over the last decade, and to focus in on a tiny corner of that canvas and tell something that's more intimate, more character-driven, and more evocative of those great classic coming-of-age stories of the 80s, that was something that was really exciting to me. When we find Bumblebee at the beginning of the film, he's a savage, brutal warrior who's been essentially hollowed out by a life of violence, and to a degree, he's lost his empathy, which is not the Bumblebee that most people know from the franchise. Bumblebee is the one Autobot, the one Transformer, who has the most affinity for humanity. He's the one who has the deepest and truest connection with humans. And so I started asking myself, well, how did he get that way? Was he always that way, or was he different? And what led to him having this kind of affinity for humanity? And that's one of the core stories that we explore in this film, is that who he was before we got to know him, and how did he become the Bumblebee that we know and love? And that's one of the things that this film explores. The film it's a two-hander. So we have Charlie, who's this disaffected teen who's been marginalized by her family and by her friends and by the people in her community, and she's dealing with her own tragedy. She's a broken soul, and the way I looked at it was they're essentially two sides of the same coin. And he has his experiences which have essentially calloused him. It's made him. It's desensitized him to humanity. He's lost his empathy, and in a lot of ways, Charlie is too. And so the film is fundamentally a love story about how these two broken souls find each other, and through the course of getting to know each other, they heal each other, they make each other whole. It's a primal story in effect. It really is a love story, and it delves into this idea that, yeah, love hurts. We all know that. It's painful. It's hard to open yourself up and be vulnerable to love someone, but it also is the thing that heals us and gives our lives meaning. And that's the core theme at the center of the film. When we find Bumblebee at the beginning of the film, he's been mistreated. He's been pushed aside. He's been, he's been neglected, and he's been hunted, and he really has seen the worst of people, and it's made him cold. It's made him, he's essentially kind of pushed back, turned his back on the world, retreated to a corner, and just wants to get away, just wants to hide, just wants to be a robot in disguise and get away from all this madness. And that's really no way to live, and that really does get to the core of what love what the absence of love can mean for us. I was working with Hailee Steinfeld as the lead of my film, and it was just kind of those ideas were right there from the moment I read the script. And she is a marvel. She's astonishing. I mean, she really is so incredibly, extraordinarily talented. She can do anything, and she breaks your heart. She makes you laugh. There's always something interesting happening on her face. You can tell that there's just the brain. The wheels are always turning. She's just incredible. She's an exceptional actress, and she really is the heart and soul of this movie. They say that it's the old saw that 90% of your job is casting, and that's true for the crew, for the artists that you hire, and obviously for the actors. If you can find the right person who really connects with the character and can bring that character to life, a lot of your job is done. And I really did luck out in the fact that my leading lady is one of the best actresses on the planet. It was an extraordinary experience. I mean, I've done a lot of stuff in my career over the 20 years I worked in animation and film. But this last year working on Bumblebee, it was one of the most amazing experiences of my life. So our approach to the 80s was to treat it sympathetically and to treat it sincerely, and there's absolute love in it. You can see it in the production design, in the costumes, in the hair and makeup. You can hear it in the soundtrack and the music that we're using. It was a real place, it was a real time, and we wanted to make sure it did not feel like we were lampooning it, that it was a cartoon, and so we treated it seriously. Once I saw George's audition, it was like, okay, well, there's our guy, just because he is funny and sharp and charming, and he's got this megawatt smile, and yet he's not necessarily someone you would think immediately like, oh yeah, that's the leading man. But he is so charming, and he really, is endearing, and he brings the character to life in a beautiful way. And as a director, really, that's what you hope for, is someone who can see beyond what's written on the page and find depth and dimension to who this character is. And he can do that. He's an exceptionally young actor. When I saw Jason Drucker's audition, it was like, all right, well, there's our Otis. And it was just one of those things where it was like, it was the perfect thing. Every choice he made was right. He seems so real, and he's just really, really funny. And he's like a grown man in a little man's body. So he's so great in the film. He's totally funny, and I love him. I think he's great. Pamela Adlon is a force of nature. I've been a fan of Pam since long before we worked together. I just think she's so sharp and so funny, but she's also a great actor. She's really, really talented, and it's Charlie's mom, Sally. It's one of those things where it could easily devolve into caricature unless you get someone who can find the different shades of the character to bring to life and know what to play. Know when to be that kind of stereotypical mom, and know when to find nuance and subtlety in the performance. And Pamela, she's just so naturally gifted and so talented, and she really understood who these characters were. She's a mom. She's got teen girls of her own. She grew up in the 80s like I did, so she has those memories of those experiences. They understood very early on what this film was, and they've just done astonishing work. I think when people see the performance that the animators at ILM were able to get out of BumbleBee, this assemblage of steel, metal, this thing that never really existed, this thing that's actually ones and zeros in a computer, he really gets to you. He gives a beautiful emotional performance, and that's a tribute to all the artists at ILM. John brings a physical presence that's undeniable. He's a big dude. He's got arms like oak trees. He's got these giant hands. He's just this big, physically imposing presence, and that was part of what the character needed to convey as well. This guy is a pillar of strength, and he's a bulldog, and once he finds his heart, he will not let go. He will pursue it doggedly, and so the physical presence needed to be an important aspect of that. Of course, John, he just got that. He has that when he walks through the door. But one of the things I wasn't aware of before we worked together on this film was how good of an actor he was. Yeah, I saw Agent Burns as something of a funhouse mirror version of Bumblebee in a way, that he is also a creature of violence. He is also a warrior. He is someone who's lived a life of violence, and we look at what that does to someone to live a life like that. And like Bumblebee, he too has lost his empathy. He does not see Bumblebee or his prey as his quarry. He does not see it as a creature that has feelings. He sees it as, this is my job, this is my mission, that's a thing. He doesn't even connect with it as an emotional creature. And so in the same way that Bumblebee has lost his empathy, Burns has as well.